So thanks again for participating in the panel. Thanks to you, Brandon. Priority Power is a returning sponsor here, so appreciate the support. Chris, thank you for the support as well. Man Energy Systems is also supporting us, and I think we first met at the first ADI forum probably 6 or 7 years back, and you guys have been coming back, so I appreciate the support. Casey, thank you for joining us. I know it's hard to take time out, but I appreciate it. We'll start with you, Casey. Please talk a little bit about your current role, and also talk a little bit about how Chevron's kind of preparing for a lower carbon future, helping move towards a lower carbon future.
Sure. So I have a history of very long titles, and this is not an exception. So I'm the General Manager of Technology Commercialization within Carbon Capture, Utilization, and Storage for Chevron New Energies. And I've practiced that. Now, to say what that is, because I had to ask the same when I was assigned the role, but basically the intent is that we've made some equity plays into novel carbon capture technology, and we are learning about that through those investments, as well as trying to progress that technology forward to market sooner. We think that opens up accessibility to the market, not only for ourselves, but into other hard-to-abate sectors. And so my role is really to look at what other technologies do we need within the portfolio to build out that accessibility entirely, and then what partners do we need to build out the market sooner to de-risk it through partnerships, whether that's government partnerships, university partnerships, or with other companies or investors.
Okay, so it's looking at the technology portfolio, both internally developed technologies, but also technologies that you're sourcing externally.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a big XY chart on my desk or my desktop, and I keep looking at, do we cover all of the different emission concentrations, and do we cover all the different volumes with our technology portfolio today to meet our needs, but also to match into the market where maybe we haven't looked to abate before.
Okay. So I know that the ventures team has made some investments in Carbon Clean and some of these other carbon capture technologies. Is that also part of your portfolio, or I guess how do you interface with them?
Good question. So Chevron has a technology ventures organization. It's been around for about 20 years, and they go into early entry, Series A and B funding for technology readiness levels around 3 to 6. And as they watch those different investments, they start to see which ones really have the holistic capability to mature to market at scale. When we start to see that connectivity, there's a bit of an iteration between my role and theirs to create a roadmap jointly. But I'll take on those technologies and invest in them more deeply around Series C as they progress in their maturity and their business capability.
Okay, but the intent is still to, I guess at what point do you start bringing those technologies internally to pilot and demonstrate and commercialize within Chevron?
Right, so you go through at different levels of technology maturity, and you're testing. I don't have a PhD, a lot of people I work with do, but the different levels of maturity allow us to test whether it's going to go beyond bench scale and laboratory, and so they start to do maybe the early pilots, very small scale, not to commercial scale. Once we see that there's potential for that commercial growth, and then we will take it on, we'll put it onto either one of our assets, or we're also looking to partner with others to help them put it on their assets and look at the whole value chain that way. And then ultimately, we will look to adopt and grow that partnership with those investments. So Carbon Clean and Svante are two of those. We have a small play in Blue Planet, and there are a couple others that we've looked at across the board or the spectrum that we've had in the portfolio for a while.
Okay, great. Thank you. Chris, can you talk a little bit about your role and MAN's, activities and footprint in and around CCUS?
Sure. So MAN is probably one of the bigger companies you've never heard of. It's a joke I have to a lot of my U.S. customers, but we have a very large marine propulsion division. We build power plants all over the world, and then myself and a few of us in the room live in the industries group, which is basically rotating equipment. So under that umbrella of industries, we've kind of have a special focus in carbon capture and heat pumps, and that's kind of my role now within the company. I manage that through Canada all the way to Argentina, and obviously most of the activities in the US. So we've been incredibly busy with CO2 projects because MAN has probably it does have the longest reference list when it comes to carbon capture projects and compression. We've been doing this for 30 years before it was cool, and so everybody comes to us to kind of understand what's going on first, and which is, a good place to be in.
So, can you talk about maybe one or two of those reference projects? Exactly what?
Sure.
What
you guys mentioned Shell Quest earlier, and that's MAN. I mean, there's all up and down. I think 11 of the big carbon capture projects are in the U.S. actually. So a lot of people are like, oh, this is a new thing. Kind of. Dakota Gas, Boundary Dam. There's some Kinder Morgan compressors. If you go through the list, we could share a public reference list with you, put it that way. So what MAN really focuses on and what we're very good at, though, is very large compression. So that's where, a small scale food and beverage CO2 thing, that's not really us. We're talking 500,000 tons and above per year. And we really like machines that have very high pressure ratios as well. So when you're looking at carbon capture technologies, they typically, put out at 10 psi, 5 psi, very low pressures, but then the pipelines run at 2,200 pounds. So we marry those in one machine typically.
And these are centrifugal compressors?
Correct, yes. API 617, Section 3, so they're all integrally geared machines. Multi-shaft, there's a bunch of different names for them, but we call them RGs, radially geared machines, but yeah, so and again, size is the thing that people really don't understand. So when you typically think compressors, it's motor, gearbox, compressor on a skid, you put it somewhere. That's not at all what we're talking about. So we're talking about the first stage on like a RG 112 or something, you can walk through it. I mean, it's 6-foot diameter pipe coming into that first stage. So it's very, very large machines. And that's what all of these carbon capture plants need when you're talking that kind of volume.
Thank you, Chris. So, Brandon, you solved the problem upstream, right? You help these guys cut a lot of the CO2 emissions, and then it reduces the amount of CO2 that these guys have to capture further downstream. So, talk a little bit about Priority Power. You were talking about how you've helped Philips for 15 years, or talk a little bit about your customers in the oil and gas space and how you help them kind of decarbonize.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me back. I'm the power guy in the room, and I'd like to start off by saying every business in North America and the planet is in the electricity business. I think every day more and more companies are starting to come by that fact, but you can Google it. Electricity for large C&I is a top 5 OPEX. If you're a chemical industrial facility, it's a top 3 OPEX. And I would say we're a 23-year-old business, and for the first, say, 17, 18 years, customers wanted 2 things. I need power, I need it to be there, and I want it really cheap. And I don't care what color it is. And how has that changed over the last, just 3 or 4 years? Something I got wrong in my career is when we started to prepare for what we now call the energy transition. And I think transition is the wrong word for what's going on. We're not leaving oil behind. I'm a believer that we're going to use more oil in 2050 than we do today unless we stop population growth. We're just going to do it a different way and a cleaner way. But it really starts with power. And so now we get calls from CEOs or board members or shareholders, hey, I've got to decarbonize to such and such percentage on this timeline. I have to account for it and report it. 2 questions, how do I do it and what is it going to cost me, typically out of fear. So our footprint, we operate just in North America, 43 states. We manage about $3 billion of annualized electricity expense. And if you take our over 7,000 customers in those 43 states, 93% of them right now are asking that question. I have to decarbonize, and how do I do it? You can't Google it. There aren't case studies. McKinsey says upwards of $300 trillion or so to get to carbon zero by 2050.
We don't trust McKinsey's numbers.
Well, guaranteed not all of that will have a positive IRR associated with it. So that was our business. We changed. We don't have an inventory of any product. We're not the supplier. So think of us as a McKinsey for energy procurement and supply. And it's not just about the commodity anymore. If you're close to electricity, it used to be about commodity. An electric bill used to be in 2010 time frame was 80% electrons and 20% wires charges. Today it's about 50-50. And the regulated wires companies are escalating 6 to 8% per year, and the power markets across the U.S. are backwardated. So if we think about how do we procure electricity at what cost, the commodity is becoming less and less relevant, which opens up things like building private distribution infrastructure. We've built more distribution infrastructure in the last 2 years in Texas than CenterPoint and Oncor combined. Why? We do it faster, cheaper. Interconnection processes, I'll mention this as a last point. People have publicly traded companies. We're ready to go. We need a gigawatt. We're going to do it in Texas and Georgia and everywhere else. And you can't get through the interconnection process. Capacity is becoming more and more of an issue, much less 3-year timelines on transformers. I sit on Governor Abbott's large load task force, and I can tell you firsthand, large loads are not going to be turned on regardless of your interconnection agreements unless they offer some type of reliability or balancing mechanism back to the grid or ancillary service. So it's a very changing time, and something to take note. And if customers have questions, we've got a pretty good business, and it's a good time for it.
No, that's great, Brandon. So you know, we haven't been going through the bios because they are all in the program booklet, and we want to maximize the time here for the conversation. But you should look up Brandon's bio. Brandon was one of the founding members of the team that made MP2 Energy that Shell eventually bought.